So we have spoken many times about what it means to really have a value, a moral, an ethical principle. And we asked in one of the classes whether it was necessary for everyone around us to be honest in order for us to be honest. And what if only half the people are honest around us? Or 10% are honest around us? Does that mean that we don't have to be honest? Does that mean that we should not be honest? Who's running our life ultimately? Are we being run by those around us? Are we reactive or are we proactive? Since we really have no way of controlling any other person, no matter how close they are to us or how distant, it's only logical that our decisions should depend on us, since the only person that can affect our actions are us. So that whole idea of taking responsibility plays in very strongly with the concept in a global way of repressive regimes and bribery that we've already kind of discussed. You might think, oh my gosh, the question is so big, worldwide corruption, worldwide repressive regimes. I think if you did a count, there may be more repressive regimes in the world than there are democratic regimes in the world. How are we supposed to deal with this giant question? It's titanic. So why can't we just say it's relative? We'll kind of do what makes sense in the moment. Well, that makes sense if the performance measure that you're going to use is what did I accomplish? Since in that arena of capitulation or compromise or whatever you want to call it, you may have accomplished something. It's possible that in the process you've also lost something, and that is the values that you hold to be true. Things, principles that you believe are important in your life. Equal pay for equal work. Respect for all genders. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, it's all relative. And that's because the measure is not success. The measure is, what did you try to do? Whether you succeed is, of course, going to be dependent on the other person. And you may not be able to change their mind. You certainly may not be able to change their entire culture. That's not what's important. What's important is, were you true to the values and principles that you have agreed with yourself to be important to you? Or at least important to the basic operation of your society. I once was taught a formula which I think is worth sharing, and it's a great measure for success. The formula was I times I equals R, where I is a value from 0 to 10. The second I is a value from 0 to 10. The first I represents any idea that you may have, any principle that you may have, any moral standard that you may have. The second I is the implementation of the idea. You may hold an idea that is brilliant. I don't know, the idea for making the iPhone. But since you're not Steve Jobs of Apple, your implementation of that may be 0. So even though your idea is a 10, because it's multiplied by a 0, the result is 0. So it's a really good way to measure the effectiveness of your decisions. Not only what is the nature of your decision or your value, as I said, or whatever, but how are you able to make it a reality? So if we want to build a better world, if we want to build an ethical world, the question is not only what are our ethics, but what efforts are we making to implement them? And they are tested most effectively when we come into contact with repressive regimes, bribery situations, etc. So whether it's a good idea to have children going to school or going to work, whether it makes sense to give people good working conditions or not, whether a working day of 8 hours is preferable to a working day of 16 hours, all of these things are great ideas, one way or the other, whatever you think makes sense. But of course, the results and the ability to achieve them depend on your implementation of those ideas. For example, if I feel it's important to give children an education, and then I structure my society so that the children have to go to work when they're 4 or 5 years old, like I saw in a carpet mill that I went to see one of my trips, then clearly the value of education is not going to be accomplished. Even though it might be a 10, its implementation is a 0 or maybe a 1. So human rights may make sense, and that's very nice. But if I don't advocate for them, if I don't make them my obligations, then they're of real no great value. Because people can have all the rights in the world. If they don't receive them, if they don't experience them, then what value do the rights really have? So I think it's very important for us to understand that if we believe that our values build a better world, if we believe that our values do no harm, we have a responsibility, we have an obligation to present those values to the world and encourage them to adopt them, even though culturally that may be a challenge for them. How do we do that? So each one of us is very small, but we can each make our own differences. For example, very well-known story of Chiquita Bananas in Colombia. They hired the cartels, or the AUC, to guard the plantations. Who did they guard the plantations from? The AUC. Because the AUC was a terrorist organization, and they threatened to burn the plantations down, and so they were hired to stop themselves from burning the plantations down. And in the meantime, now that they're hired, they have all this money, it gives them weapons, it gives them authority, it gives them power, and they're able to abuse, and they did abuse, tens of thousands of people living in Colombia. Maybe we don't want the bananas from Colombia. Maybe we want to let the AUC find a different source of income rather than our protection money. Someone's got to draw the line. If the AUC doesn't have money and they are an acknowledged terrorist group, then at some point they can't buy bullets anymore, or machetes, or whatever it is that they use. Someone has to make those decisions. And as a global society, we have to understand that that's us. And if we don't make them, then we are essentially supporting exactly the opposite of what we claim to believe in. When we understand things from this partnership model, when we understand that it's not just about the shareholder's position, but the the consumer's position, the employee's position, and in fact the natural resource that we're harvesting position, then suddenly things take on a different perspective. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about when we talk about corruption and bribery from an ethical perspective. Today, it may be fine and dandy to support the AUC, but as they morph and develop, and 5 or 10 years from now, it comes out that our organization funded them, what's going to happen to our customer base? How will our employees feel coming to work knowing that we have funded an organization that raped and brutalized women? So, especially in today's social media world. So you see that the decisions that we make and do, which I've emphasized over and over again, have profound impact. So when we are talking about how we conduct ourselves in terms of internationally and these repressive regimes, I think it's worthwhile to believe and to examine our values. And if we find them to be of no harm and therefore valuable to share, I think we have to get together with others in our industry and agree that as a group, that's a strategy that we're going to use. Not that we have to agree on anything else, but that at least we will agree that in these particular zones where these repressive regimes are looking to acquire the wealth that we have so that they can further abuse the citizens that they have, we should consider as an industry to stay away from those areas and let them resolve their differences internally until they are prepared to, when in Rome, do as we do. That would be my guidance on that subject.